hi everyone. I'm Dr. John Demartini, and welcome to our weekly live event of education. Since I was 17, 18 years old, and I had the opportunity to meet a great teacher named Paul Bragg, who inspired me one night to become a teacher. He mentioned the term universal law. I didn't know anything about what that meant at the time. But in my pursuit of wanting to know what it is, because it sounded kind of cool, I went and exploring what that might be. I later went on to a dictionary and to encyclopedias to know what is a universal law. It led me to the study of natural laws, which are another name for it. And it led me to the understanding of the logos, which was the reason and order that underlied the universe, that many great philosophers believed existed. In my pursuit of these principles or these laws that seem to rule the universe, like the law of gravity by Newton and Einstein, the law of electromagnetism like by Maxwell and Faraday, and other laws, the law of conservation by Clausius, I wanted to understand what was the most universal of all universal laws, the keystone, the very foundation, the edifice of all laws. The most general universal law. I think that's been the pursuit of many great minds. I want to build a foundation of knowledge on that. And one of those laws, one of the most universal of all laws, is called the law of the one to many. And I found this law applying on the micro level in the subatomic world, and I found it in the macro level in the astronomical world, and of course, anywhere in between, including all of human behavior. I'd like to elaborate on that law and give you some idea on how this could be useful to know and to apply into your life. It will give you a competitive advantage. So you might want to write some notes down and take notes to what I'm about to share. The law of the one to many says, from the one comes the many, and from the many comes the one. Now think about that. From the one comes the many, and from the many comes the one. And let's look at the ramifications of that. From the one quantum vacuum at Planck's scale came particles and antiparticles into existence. Some believe that the universe was beginning in the so-called Big Bang theory, coming from one into many. And some believe that possibly the universe will do just the opposite, a big crunch from the Big Bang, or go into a black hole and recycle itself in ekpyrotic models from the many back into the one. This law, in gravity, you're going from many radii going into one source. And electromagnetism, from a point source, you're going into many radii. One to many with light, many to one with gravity. So even though you've got a universal law of gravity and a universal law of electromagnetism, you have a universal law that supersedes that, called the law of the one to many. From the one point source, light radiates into many. Like on a sphere, you have many different points along the sphere circumference and outer sphere, but it all points to one at the center. This one to many occurs in the form of going from oneness into manyness, which is fragmentation or disintegration. And then you got also gravity going the other direction into integration from manyness to oneness. So we could say it's integration and disintegration is another name for the law of the one to many. We could call that also, when you're building subatomic particles into atomic particles, you're building particles and then you're disassembling them. That's called recombination when you're building it, and ionization when you take an atom and you build and destroy it. Another name for it is the build and destroy, remodeling. The universe, in order to evolve, has to remodel itself. And in your life, you have to build and destroy yourself. If you're married, you'll probably notice that they both build and destroy you, and you both build and destroy them. And that's part of the equation of the one to many. Now, at the molecular level, you have what they call SN1, SN2, nucleophilic substitution, and electrophilic elimination reactions. These reactions are build and destroy, going from many to one and one to many. We get into the cell, we end up, we have assemblage of molecules and a disassemblage, building and destroying, catabolism, anabolism, if you will. And in the cell, we've got mitosis, which is building of a cell, and apoptosis, destroying of a cell, going from one cell into many parts, or going from many parts into building one cell. When we go into the tissue level, we actually are taking cells and organizing them into tissue or disassembling them into breaking down. And this is called, in a sense, plasticity. Bones are remodeling themselves and building and destroying. Neurons are building and destroying. Connective tissue is building and destroying. In fact, all of your organs are building and destroying and having plasticity. You also have, and you find out, you have anabolic build and catabolic autonomic nervous system in your physiology. This is the parasympathetic and sympathetic, which is build and destroy, reduction and oxidation. So it all scales up to the body. We see this. And in our psychology, we have pride and shame. We pride ourselves and go into fire and build ourselves up and inflate ourselves and deflate ourselves. One is, in a sense, radiative and expansive, and one is gravitative. Again, the same law. And then we look in our relationships. There's times when we feel like we're building it and supporting each other, and others when we're challenging each other and criticizing each other and destroying it. And build and destroy is going to do it. If we get cocky in our relationship, they will criticize us. If we get humble, they will lift us. And they're trying to keep us authentic. They're trying to keep us at the border between build and destroy. Maximum growth and development has been known biologically to occur at the border of support and challenge, build and destroy, order and chaos. Different names for the same principle. This law is the most universal law I've been able to find in all my studies. It's a very powerful principle. On a larger scale, within society, you have people that are joining together in groups and people that are against the group. In fact, if you move into a town for the first time and you've come from an out-of-town place and you move in, you want to fit in and join and be part of the group. But once you fit the group, you want to stand out. And then when you're dating many people and you're dating many boyfriends or girlfriends or whatever your choices are gender-wise, you'll find out when you're dating many, you're trying to find that special one. But once you got the one, you're wondering about the many. The one and the many applies in relationship dynamics. If you look at your life on a social scale, you'll see that there's union and division, peace and war, cooperation, competition, and business. There's build and destroy. There's large organizations that decentralize and then build entrepreneurs, and then they rebuild and go from many into one again. So this law is the most universal law that we find. And we'll find that the more you force yourself towards the many, the more nature forces you back to the one. The more you force this way, back to the many again. So from the one comes the many, comes the one. If you understand that and understand that that is what is nature's way, you won't fight that and try to force it into one or the other side. You'll see that that's the case. Even in your own being at the level. And by the way, this goes on. Geologically, you have things that are plumes that are basically fire expanding. And then you have plunges, which is contracting. Fire, water, heat, cool, condensation, rarefaction. So on geology, that the entire weather patterns that we have is fire rising up at the equator and cooling at the poles and causing the Hadley circulations and all the different circulations. And our entire meteorological weather patterns is built out of the one and the many, because it's going down and condensing towards the poles and it's rarefying and going towards the many. So all of meteorological, all of geological, and astronomical, you find that stars are forming, protostars are forming from gas and dust towards oneness, and then they radiate outward and go into an explosion in a supernova and eventually go back into a black hole. And it goes from one to many, one to many. And galaxies are radiating out and forming new stars in active galactic nuclei, and then also condensing back and going into a black hole. And you'll find that this is occurring. And this occurs on the macro scale, possibly the Big Bang and the black hole. Super galaxy clusters emerging and super attractors converging. And so divergence, convergence is on all scales. So from the subatomic particle to the astronomical domain, this law is applying. It's the most universal law. All of the other laws that I studied, from conservation laws to physics laws to mathematical laws, are all equations between one and many. You start with a series of reactants, you get a product. So you get reactants, many go into a product, or you go from product and you go into various reactants. All those are balanced by an equation. So in math, we find this law. We find this in chemistry. We find this in physics. We find this at the micro level. We find this at the macro level. It is the most universal law that you could mention. And Mortimer Adler, in his great Centopicon volume set by Britannica, discusses this law also. It's worth reading. But this law, when you understand it, is magnificent because you can set realistic expectations in your life when you understand it. When you also, when you go in your own life, you have one human being, your one essential self. In philosophy and ontology, you have one essential self called the soul. It then fragments in the existential world into many personas and mass. In fact, personal development is the reintegration of the many different personalities we play in society, fitting in to eventually our authentic self, our one soul. And what's interesting in relationships, if you fire yourself up and go into pride and start to think you're inflated a bit and go towards that, and you look down on somebody and degrade them and talk down on them, you eventually get humbled to be brought back down. And if you go down and dilute yourself and deflate yourself, people lift you up to try to get you in equilibrium because of the law of the one to many. And you'll get criticism if you get cocky, you'll get humbled and you'll get praised. And nature's constantly trying to sociologically get you into equilibrium in your life. Also in relationship and business, if you get puffed up and you're out of equilibrium and you're not being authentic and you're in one of your personas that's inflated and you talk down to your customer and don't meet their needs, you eventually get humbled because there's no sales, because you're projecting assumptions onto them and they're not getting their needs met. And you're thinking the one is more important than the many. And eventually you realize you get humbled and you start thinking about them. And when you get the many back up, if you go too far with the many and you altruistically sacrifice for the many, you sacrifice your profits. And so again, you eventually get proud again and say, I deserve more than that. And you bring it back in equilibrium. Nature is trying to find an equilibrium, an equitable position in fair exchange in all relationship dynamics, all equations to balance between the law of the one and many. And in Einstein's equation, when it talks about energy, which is a radiant energy or potential energy, kinetic energy, it's going into the potential of turning it into matter. So if you take matter and convert it into energy, a tiny bit of matter makes a lot of energy and it radiates out or it condenses back into matter. No matter where we go in the study of life, we're going to find this law of the one to many. And this is the most crucial of laws to master because you'll set realistic expectations on life if you understand it in application. And if you're going out there and you want to make a vast difference in the world, you have to meet their needs. You can't think of only you, because if you're thinking of only you and you're not thinking of them, you've got to find a balance between your own individual oneness in undivided you, and then express what it is that you want to do, which is your mission of expression to the many. And the bigger the expression you're able to do, and what's interesting in the study of psychology, you'll realize that we're all reflections of each other. When you can identify the many inside the one, you've mastered your life. You know, and Schopenhauer basically says that we become our true self to the degree that we make everyone else ourself. When all the parts out there are reflections of what's inside you, you've mastered your life. In the Breakthrough Experience program, which I've been teaching for 32 years almost, which I've done 1,112 times now, I teach a method in there where we actually identify a trait, action, inaction that we perceive another individual displaying or demonstrating that we admire or despise most, that we look up to or down. If we look up to them, we minimize ourselves. If we look down on them, we exaggerate ourselves. If we are too humble to admit what we see in them is inside us and we disown it, we stay infatuated. If we're too proud to admit what we see in them is inside us, we stay resentful. But if we go in there and identify, go to a moment where and when you perceive yourself displaying or demonstrating the same or similar specific trait, action, inaction that you admire or despise in them, and you own it, what you've done is you've taken the many and you've incorporated it into the one, and the one and the many are now in equilibrium, and there's a reflective awareness, and you've maximized the potential that the law of the one and many can provide you. When you realize that whatever you see in others is inside you, and you're not too proud or too humble to admit what you see in them is inside you, you level the playing field, you balance the equation, you have equity between yourself and them, you have equanimity within yourself, you maximize your potential, you're inspired by what you do, and we get grateful, we get inspired, we end up enthused, we become certain and present, and we feel love whenever we have the law of the one and many balanced in our life. It is the most universal principle. My entire Demartini method that I teach in the Breakthrough Experience and I teach training programs around the world for is teaching people the science of how to access the center between the law of the one and many. From the one comes the many. From many comes the one. If you start with one universe origin, we could call it in theology, the one God into many humans, or we could say the monarchy going into the democracy. That's the law of the one to many. They found out in sociology, if you try to have complete autocracy and a monarch without caring about the people, you get a tyrant. And if you get irrational tyranny. And if you go the other direction where you get the many and you don't have the one, you have chaos, irrational tyranny, and rational tyranny. I said it backwards. And what's happening is it's nature is forcing you to the balance of one and many. That's why in some governments, they have to have one leader, but they have to have checks and balances from the many to make sure that they're representing the many. If we find the balance between the one and many, we have the most stable, sustainable system. The same thing in our body. If we have too much catabolism, we break down. If we have too much anabolism, we build up. When we emaciate, when we satiate and get fat. And either one of those creates illnesses. But if we find a nice balance, a metabolic equilibrium between the one and the many, which is union and division, catabolism and anabolism, we maximize our wellness and potential. So anything we can do to ask questions, the quality of our life is based on the quality of the questions we ask. If we are perceiving ourselves inflated, we need to ask questions that humble us. If we're perceiving ourselves deluded, we need to ask questions that build us. If we ask questions that equilibrate the mind, we stabilize ourselves in the law of the one to many. As I said, if you're in a relationship, for instance, and you're feeling that you're the overdog and you feel you've got more power and you're inflated, you're gonna be dating somebody. If they're underdog, they're gonna be wanting the one and holding on to you with an infatuation, because when they're infatuated, they want that one and only one, that special one. But if you're the one that's the overdog, you're gonna wanna keep your options open because you don't feel like you have a match yet. And so what happens is you keep your options open and wanna see many, wanna keep yourself dating, and you don't wanna be tied down. This person wants to tie you down because they're the underdog and they want the one when you want the many. And at the same time, you can turn that and swap the other direction. They can be empowered and then you can be the underdog and now you'll want the one and they'll want the many. But nature forces to match in a marriage and a relationship to keep that balance between the one and many, which is the most stable, sustainable relationship there is. So whether you have a relationship with your kids the same way, with your spouse, people at work, people that are customers, people in society, this law is automatically a law that nobody violates. And if you attempt to violate, you get a lesson. That's why there's a law of heuristic escalation in society that says that whenever you're trying to promote something, the equal and opposite will also be promoted in order to maintain the law of the one to many. And if you try to be a dictator and try to be a controller of everything, you'll get a revolution of people, the many, that will try to balance it. So nature forces you to get into equanimity and back into balance between the law of the one to many. So in all areas of our life, even in economics, if all of a sudden the market goes up and it's inflated prices and it's puffed up and it's inflated, that's radiation, it ends up having forces that go and deflate it to back into the mean. And if it goes below it and it concentrates and goes into gravitation and it gets denser than it does, nature forces it to expand again and it goes back up. So the markets are oscillating by the one to many on a path called the mean. And if an individual sets realistic expectations on their investments according to the mean, they have less volatilities, more stabilities. They're less likely to let the outer world and the market dictate their actions and be more focused on actually long-term investments. And it's not the timing of the market, it's the time in the market, as great philosophers have said. And that same law, the one to many, applies. So in our economics, it's applying. In our physiology, it's applying. In our sociology, it's applying. In our relationships and marriages and family, it's applying. In our spirituality, it's applying. If we inflate ourselves, we're inauthentic. If we deflate ourselves, we're inauthentic. But if we are being ourselves and we find that balance between one to many, we now realize that everything around us is a reflection of us, and we have the authentic self, and we're integrated, and we're inspired, and we're enthused, and we're grateful, and we have love. And that's the spiritual path. And in our mind, if we go and inflate ourselves and we go and kind of talk down to people and think we know better, that we get humbled and we get noise in the brain. If we infatuate with somebody, they'll occupy space and time and mind and create noise because we're diffracting ourselves. deflecting and diffracting. And if we end up having equality and realize that their opinion and our opinion both matter, and we merge and integrate those opinions and create a higher dialectic out of it, we expand ourselves on the intellectual fronts. So in every area of our life, literally, the law of the one and many applies. And I just wanted to cover that law of the one and many because it's so applicable in your daily life. As I said, you have many personas in one being. And every time you, in the breakthrough experience, when I help people go through the DeMartini method, and they transcend a judgment, when they're judging, whenever you're judging something, you're exaggerating or minimizing it. And whenever you do, you're not being yourself. And so nature forces that judgment to eventually be humbled and eventually be brought back in equilibrium, and you're back into your real authentic self for a second. The moment you do, you get promoted and transcend what you were judged and on to the next judgment. And then you polarize yourself again into the many personas, and then eventually you're forced back into integration again. And then you're polarized and integrate. So there's an ongoing, you might say, integration, disintegration in order to remodel yourself along your journey of evolution. And the DeMartini method is designed to equilibrate those and to bring the law of the one to many back into balance the second you've got it dispersed. So when people come to me in the breakthrough experience and they say, you know, I'm infatuated with this individual, I'm inflating them and deflating me. I'm radiating, expanding them, they're greater than I am, and I'm minimizing me, I'm shrunk. So I'm here, I'm gravitational, they're radiational. They're greater than me. So the equation is out of balance. And if I ask, so go to a moment where and when I perceive within myself, or you see within yourself, the same or similar specific trait, action, inaction you admire in them, and own it, you bring them down and you bring yourself up. Because you realize and level the playing field. When you level the playing field, you go back into authenticity. The moment you're authentic, you empower yourself. The moment you do, you have a moment of love and gratitude, a moment of authenticity, a moment of the soul, a state of unconditional love. There's no judgment. You then get promoted to the next illusion, the next judgment, the next mystery. Whatever, I always say that we don't really know things that we infatuate with because we're blind to the downsides. We don't really know things that we're resentful to because we're blind to the upsides. And when we're looking down on it and blind to the upsides of it, right? And we're thinking that we're proud and looking down on it, we're too exaggerating of ourselves and proud of ourselves, and we're not being authentic. And when we're looking up to something, infatuated, minimizing yourself, we're minimizing yourself, we're not authentic. But the moment we have reflective awareness, we have love for somebody, we're authentic. But the moment we do, we go on to the next judgment. Because our nature is to constantly go to the next mystery. Once we know something and we love something and we've learned about it, we go on to the next mystery on this vast universe we have to study the mysteries. And the greatest way to understand the great mysteries is to understand that it's a repeating experience of the law of the one to many. So anything that you're going to pursue and learn, you're going to see this law of the one to many apply. And I've studied 299 different disciplines and written about each of these disciplines. And that law is the most universal law in every discipline I study. If you go to anthropology and you look at the evidence of the human beings, you have the out of Africa hypothesis, which is the law of the one. And it's basically a mitochondrial DNA lineage from out of Africa, somewhere in Africa. And you also have the multi-regional hypothesis, the idea that there may be multiple sources of where human beings may have started. And by the way, when you stop and think about it, there had to be a man and a woman simultaneously found in the same location to start this journey. Call it Eve if you want, call it Adam if you want to go from biblical language. But whatever it is, they got a name. It could have been John and Sally for all we know. But the point is, maybe it was me. Maybe I'm older than I think. But in the process of doing that, that one and many is anthropology. And then when you look at it, you go from one location, it disperses into many locations, and you have this diffraction and disbursement of human beings around the world. And then you also have this idea that there's many locations around the world. And the more we study the origins of man, human beings, we find out that, or man and woman, the more we find out that, or transgender today, we got to put that in there because it's a whole mixture of gender. The more we realize that there may be multiple locations where human beings may have originated, not just one. And there's just, that's a model. But the law of the one to many is applying there. If we look at it in physics, we see the same thing. So every discipline that I've gotten the opportunity to study, right now I'm just finishing up a textbook, an 826-page textbook on the sun, on helioseismology and radiation of the sun. And in the nuclear core of the sun, you've got many hydrogen protons joining together to make helium, going through a series of steps to make helium, which is a hydrogen fusion process to make helium, to create out of that one core a radiant energy that gives life to the solar system and all the parts of the solar system. And what's interesting is there's a circulating solar wind that comes back, and they recycle within the solar system. And this is a law of the one to many applying there. So no matter what I go and study, no matter what field that I've gone into, no matter what it is, sociology, psychology, physics, theology, mathematics, endocrinology, you've got from endocrinology, you have the suprachiasmatic nucleus and you have the hypothalamus going to all the different organs from the one primary endocrine gland, the pituitary gland for glands, and for the autonomics, the suprachiasmatic nucleus for all the different rhythms of the body. There's one location, a pontifical location, that then expresses to all the cells and brings circadian rhythms, brings hormone balance, and brings autonomic balance. But you also have the feedbacks from all the cells going back to give impact back to it. If you study this law of the one to many, it's absolutely essential for the healing arts, the study of the healing arts, bringing that into balance. So no matter what field we study, that law applies. And I just want to give you kind of an overview of that one law to make you contemplate it. You can maybe go and study it. Again, Mortimer Adler in Syntopican volumes 1 and 2, he talks about the law of the one to many. It's worth reading, but it is the most universal. It's also called the law of similars and differences. Every judgment, when you infatuate with somebody, you see more similars and differences. And when you resent somebody, you see more differences and similarities. Again, the law of the one to many. So all of our emotions are based on this law of the one to many. And all of our physics and every aspect of our life is based on it. In fact, you won't find any area of your life that's not impacted by the law of the one and the many. It's called also peace and war, peace, union, division. It's got many different names. Cooperation, competition, as I said earlier. And in your business, if you expect to have peace without war, if you expect your family to have one, everybody's united and we're all agreeing on it, you're going to have somebody outside that you're going to have a war with in order to have that. If not, you're going to have peace and war in the family because you're going to have the law of the one to many ruling it. Agreements and disagreements, cooperation, competition, build and destroy. In fact, remodeling, in order to evolve, the evolution itself requires a remodeling of build and destroy. That's why you have anabolic and catabolic in your body, but you need that in your life and in society and in the solar system and the galaxy, etc. This law is the universal law. And I just wanted to introduce you to it so you have a glimpse of its impact in your life, because there's not one aspect of your life that's not impacted by the law of the one to many. Like I said, when I started studying universal laws when I was 17, 18 years old, I first started reading at that time. I just wanted to know what a universal law was. But this one law was one of the most significant laws that I found. In my prophecy program, my 7-day program on leadership and mastery, I emphasize and I developed this in this case. In Jet Set magazine, about 3 or 4 or 5 months ago, if you look back at Jet Set magazine, which I write for many magazines around the world, but this one, I elaborate on this law of the one to many. I wanted people that were in the magazine, the readers or primary jet owners, to read about it because it has application in aeronautics, it has application in finance, an application in social leadership skills. So no matter what we do, you know, if you try to be a leader and you forget the people, you become a tyrant, you get humbled and a revolution occurs. If you try to go and sacrifice for the people, you get chaos and you get a disorder and there's no leadership at all. Nature forces you into equilibrium. So as St. Augustine said, he was a theologian, and he said that the will of God is equilibrium. When the will of man matches the will of God, he's graced by the presence of the divine. Now that's a theological language, and that God is not an anthropomorphic deity that we make up in our minds, but it's just the presence of the laws of nature expressed in the form of a grand organized design that's part of our nature. And I think that we deserve to understand this law. And if we really explore this, I'm absolutely certain it will give you a competitive advantage in the world, which is why I'm taking the time to just introduce it to you and put the information out there to start you on a journey of exploring it, because it can make a difference. All of my seminars are revolved around the law of the one to many. All of the teachings and every level of the programs and the 76 courses I teach in my Concourse of Wisdom curriculum are all elaborating on that law so you can have a deeper understanding on it. Because whoever understands that to the fullest is at way more competitive advantage in this world. They have realistic expectations, they have appreciation, they understand how the law is working. And when you're trying to work within the laws of the universe and not fighting the laws of the universe, you're way more productive, way more fulfilled, and more great. I really believe that gratitude and love of the heart is a byproduct of living congruently with the law of the one to many. So I wanted to share that with you in this little discourse. And also, every time you live and you understand this law of the one to many, you're going to expand your game. And I just want to take a moment to share with you two things. One is there's a gift for you. It's a complimentary gift. I want you to have this gift. It's called Awakening Your Astronomical Vision. And at the end of my presentation, I want people to know that they can get this little gift. It's a $50 value. It's profound. All you have to do is go to demartini.inc/law or /law. And I'm absolutely certain I did this presentation at a planetarium to a group of executives on how to have a vast vision, how to expand and make a bigger difference. So if there's a part of you that would like to make a bigger difference, if there's a part of you that would like to expand your business and expand your difference that you make in the world, astronomical vision, this awakening astronomical vision will be valuable. Grab it, take advantage of it. I guarantee you it's an inspiring little product, and it will definitely help you see a bigger vision. I've never met anybody that didn't want to make a difference in the world, but this is definitely an audio program that can help you make a bigger difference and see a bigger vision. You're only going to grow as big as your vision. If your vision isn't astronomical, don't expect to make a global effect. So take advantage of that little gift. It's a great one. And also, I have another program that's coming up that'll be a webinar that's coming up. I just want to let you know in advance. It's Discover the Hidden Order that unites and empowers us all. I'm going to show you how to find the hidden order in your daily chaos, how to ask questions that liberate you from emotional baggage, and how to see why things occur in your life that you thought were chaotic and mistakes, to show that there isn't any. It's just a misunderstanding on your part and not knowing how to ask the questions. So I'm going to give you the questions to ask. I'm going to show you how to see the hidden order. So instead of having emotional baggage accumulate in your life, you'll have gratitude and love. So you can have fuel in life and not baggage and friction. So this will be a very powerful program, webinar coming up on the 29th, coming up in September, just in a few days. And don't want to miss this. I guarantee this is a very powerful exploration. I'm going to be explaining how the DeMartini method plays a role in the evolution of human consciousness and what role you can play to find the hidden order in your life. There's absolutely no reason you have to have a chaotic experience when you understand the law of the one in many and you understand the hidden order in your apparent chaos. So I just want to let those be known. Thank you for joining me on this special little event, this little webinar, and may you go and explore the law of the one in many. It is the most universal law and the most important one you can understand. It will give you a competitive advantage. I look forward to seeing you. Thank you for joining me today. Grab that gift, awakening your astronomical vision. Grab that. It's a great gold mine. And I look forward to seeing you at the next event on the Hidden Order.